things out of session 2 and put them in session 1, and that included residence and GPA requirements. And I had told you that I wasn't going to quiz you on GPA or residence requirements because I felt like it wasn't fair since we weren't doing the quiz until 2 weeks later. And although I removed what I thought were all the residence questions when I was grading, I realized that I had left in residence-related questions, and every single one of you got them correct. So, yeah, round of applause on that, seriously. So what that tells me is that you were reviewing and you knew where in the catalog to look. So that's why I decided to give a bonus. And another kind of shout out, so even without that bonus, even when I deduct that bonus out, I like to keep a tally each week, each quiz, to look at your average, and then I compare that to past years. So this is my 5th year doing this, and for quiz 2, your class has scored the highest across the board on quiz 2. So that's a big deal, right? So, first of all, because of that, you all got an additional entry in the opportunity drawing. And here's my challenge to you, is let's keep it going. Let's see if this class can do it across the board. Alright? Let's see if you can do it across the board. You'll have bragging rights and maybe something else. Okay? Alright. Okay. Alright, any questions before we start? Any questions the quiz might have brought up for you? Okay? Okay, you'll notice that you're a little closer than normal. That's because the projector's not working, so we're going to be using the TV. I also printed this week's PowerPoint because the information is a little different than what's in the catalog. That's because there's some catalog changes from the 1920 catalog in reference to GE. So I wanted to give you plenty of room for notes, and I wanted you to be able to see some of the fine print because I had to go kind of small in print. When I'm asking questions on next week's quiz and on the final in regards to general education, if you use the 1819 catalog, you may get the answers wrong. So I want you to use this PowerPoint presentation when you're reviewing and answering those questions, because this has the accurate information for the catalog that I'm asking questions about, which is the 1920 catalog, which is what our new students will be using. Okay, any questions on that? All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to do Wacky Stop Wednesday first. Wait, I need my song. Okay, so this is in honor of not only spring training opening, but the song is for my favorite team. Yes.
For orientation, when we do college cheers, this last summer, our College of Health and Human Services redid that song. What was it? Sweet HHS, bum bum bum, making people feel so good, so good.
I remember that.
It's a preview. It was so fun. And we won.
Not a competitive bunch, are we? Alright. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start on page 1, and we're going to be talking about general education this week. So these, in the current catalog, these span pages 93 through 102. So general education is the 9th out of 9 graduation requirements for the bachelor's degree. And when you're looking in the catalog, when you first start out on page 93, there's several paragraphs that basically outline what the goal of each area of GE is. And sometimes that's helpful for students. We don't go into detail, but it's good that it's all explained there. And sometimes students want to know, hey, how come as an engineering student do I have to take humanities? And so those pages in the catalog explain general education, why they're a part of a bachelor's degree at SDSU, and what the goals of each area are. So like I mentioned, you're going to want to keep this PowerPoint for quiz and final. because if you refer to the 1819 catalog in some places, you may answer the question incorrectly. So GE is, GE is split into 4 main areas. So item 1 is communication and critical thinking, which is a minimum of 9 units. Item 2 and 3 is the foundations of learning and lifelong learning and self-development, which is a minimum of 31 units. And item 4 is explorations of human experience, which is a minimum of 9 units. So this equals a total of 49 minimum units required for GE. If you refer back to your catalog, this information is correct. On page 95, under General Education Requirements and Limitation, can somebody read me that paragraph and the 3 rules that are listed there, please?
I'm sorry, what page?
It's page 95, and it's under General Education Requirements and Limitations.
So you must complete all requirements in sections 1 through 4, for a total of 49 units. Because you must be a junior, which is 60 units, to satisfy the Upper Division Section 4 requirement, you should not register for Upper Division GE courses until the semester in which you complete 60 units. Only those categories listed in general education areas may be used to satisfy general education requirements. Am I continuing?
And then there's 3 rules after that, right?
Mhm.
Does somebody else want to jump in and read those 3 rules for us? Anybody? Yes, thank you.
Within these 49 units, the following limitations apply. 1. Explorations of human experience courses shall not be taken sooner than the semester in which you pass 60 units. 2. Credit no credit grades cannot be used in section 1, communication and critical thinking, or section 2. A.4, mathematics and quantitative reasoning. 3. Courses numbered 296, 299, 496, 499, 500 level, and above cannot be used in general education.
Perfect, thank you. So it's important to earmark page 95 in those rules because if a student violates one of those 3 rules, that class will not count for general education. So it's good to know where they are. I may ask about those rules. And I'll be repeating them, especially when it comes to when a student can take upper division GE and when a student cannot take courses for credit, no credit in GE. Underneath that is transfer students. It's additional information, so it includes ways that transfer students specifically can clear lower division GE from community college. So one way for a transfer student to come in with their lower division GE entirely done is by taking you'll see that in the additional information, they can take a CSU transfer certification from community college. They can also do an IGETC, and that is specifically for UC, but if a student has fulfilled the IGETC, will clear the lower division GE as if they had done a CSU certification. Any questions on that? So the pattern that we're going for, or that we're going to go through, applies to all majors. There is only one major in the 1920 catalog that has a specialized GE pattern, and that is liberal studies. So the only major that has a specialized GE pattern is liberal studies. So when we get to orientation and we get to the degree requirements presentation, liberal studies students are actually pulled out of that presentation and put into their own presentation. Because if they listen to the general education pattern for all of their majors, it's really going to be confusing for them. They have their own pattern. Any questions on that? Yes.
Well, I have a question about the liberal studies exactly, but so courses like psychology and sociology, they're like for the GEs and like behavioral or something like that?
Yep, and we're going to cover that.
Okay, say you complete those courses, but an upper division course, okay, I don't know how I'm phrasing it. If you complete those 2 courses, could you still go ahead and take a class that requires those courses even before you hit 60 units?
Not to count in GE, and we'll talk about why.
Okay, won't count in GE.
Right.
Okay.
Yep, we'll talk about why. Yes.
Why is it that liberal studies has its own GE pattern?
That's a great question. All of their classes are both connected to the general education, and every single class they take is connected to their credential. So they have to take a very, very specific pattern of courses. So they're clearing, they still have a general education pattern and a major pattern. It's just that all of their courses are wrapped up in their credential. So even once they get past orientation, if they come into our office, because we are the general education advising office, we'll actually refer them back to their own major advisor. It's the only instance in which the major advisor is actually going to provide advising on the general education pattern because it's specialized in that major. Yes?
Not concerning their illicit questions, but you just mentioned that GE is in 4 areas. What was the 3rd area?
Yeah, I kind of bundled all that together, didn't I? The 3rd area, so the 2nd area is foundations of learning. The 3rd area is lifelong learning and self-development. In the catalog, and you'll see this in a little while, but I split it up for the slides purposes. When you get the 1920 catalog, I'm not really sure why they did this, but they say area 1 and then they say area 2 and 3. So they put it together, even though it's 2 separate sections, and then they say area 4. Okay. And then before we move on to the first area and start going through the different areas, it's good to keep this PowerPoint and refer to it first, and then also, I'm not ever going to ask specific questions about will this course fit into this area for the most part, but if I do ask you a question, like does Anthropology 101 cover life sciences and does Geography 101 cover physical science, if I ask a question like that, I'm only going to ask questions about specific courses that are correct in the 1819 catalog. Okay, because I couldn't list out all the courses on a PowerPoint presentation. So if I ask you specific course questions, you can be sure that I'm only asking questions that are correct in the 1819 catalog. I'm not trying to trick you. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so let's go to item 1, which is communication and critical thinking. So this is a minimum of 9 units. So this is called CSU Area A. And it's our English language and communication and critical thinking. So it's important to note for all 3 of these courses, the student may not use no credit grades in this section. A grade of C-, which is a 1.7 or better is required. And every student has to complete 1 from each of the following 3 sections. So 1 course from oral communication, 1 course from written communication, and 1 course from critical thinking. There's been a name change, so if you look in the 1819 catalog, you'll notice that written communication was called composition. It's no longer called composition, it's now called written communication. And you'll notice that the 3rd class there used to be called intermediate composition and critical thinking, is now just called critical thinking. So that's a good example where you'll want to use your PowerPoint if I ask you specific questions. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so all three of these courses are part of what we call the Golden 4. And we'll talk about the 4th course in just a second. So we have 4 courses that every student has to finish within their first year. We call them the Golden 4. All 4 of these courses have enforced registration. That means they're either going to have to take them their first or second year, depending on which is which, depending on their major. And we'll talk a little bit more about that during this session and then in sessions to come. Any questions on that? Okay. So next up, we're going to go through item 2, which is foundations of learning. This is a minimum of 28 units. So it starts, foundations of learning, so when I say foundations, that means lower division. So it starts with the natural sciences and the quantitative reasoning. So this is CSU Area B, which is scientific inquiry and quantitative reasoning. So this is the science and math area of GE. So every student must complete a physical science course, a life science course, and a lab. So if you're looking in the catalog and you're looking at the lab sections, if you see a course, well, if you look in the, like just say physical science and lab, And you see a course that's listed in both places the exact same way. So Chemistry 100, for example, is listed in Physical Science. And then in the lab, it's Chemistry 100. That indicates that it's a lab and lecture packaged together. Another way you can look at that is by going to that course description. If it's 4 units or more, that's a lab and lecture combined. If it's 3 units, that means it's a standalone lecture. And then the fourth area is mathematics quantitative reasoning course. There's no credit, we don't allow credit, no credit grading for GE Math, and that is the fourth course that is part of the Golden 4. So these are required registration courses for freshmen. And just a reminder, a student's pathway with math will be based on their major, which is either going to be STEM or non-STEM. I'm going to talk a little bit about this because it is going to come up. I'm not going to quiz about this part of it. I mean, I may ask some questions about STEM, non-STEM, and I'll probably ask you, is math a required registration course? This part's going to come up and it'll come up later, so I'm just going to talk about it briefly now. A student is not allowed to change majors before the census date. Does anyone have an idea of when the census date is? Take a guess. It's in September. It's in the end of September, which is after the add-drop deadline. So if a student, the reason I'm explaining this to you, so if a student comes in and is a business student, that is a STEM or a non-STEM? Non-STEM. And they have to take math their first semester. They are on the non-STEM pathway. And they tell you, hey, I want to switch to engineering. But the problem is, which is a STEM pathway, right? That's a different pathway from math. But the problem is, they are not allowed to change their major until after census, which means which is after add-drop. Which means that for their first semester, if they're required to take math their first semester, they have to stay on the pathway of the major that they were admitted to. So even if they're following a different major, which they are allowed to do except for nursing, when it comes to math, they have to stay on their original pathway. Then in spring semester, as long as they change their major in the fall semester, in spring, then they can loop back around and start on that different pathway. Does any questions come up for that? Yes.
So is that first semester wasted, or
Is that what?
is that first semester gonna be wasted, or how does that work?
Well, we want to be careful not to use the word wasted. But that's a valid question. It's kind of tricky. So what my advice to you would be just to explain, you know, this is part of our policy, this is an enforced registration course, and the pathways stem from one of our executive orders. You don't necessarily need to explain that to the student. But if they really push on it, at that point, that would be a good time to come grab either me or one of my colleagues from our office, and we can kind of better explain the policy to them. Because for the most part, students are not looking to change their major right away. But in some cases, especially if they're told, hey, you have to take this course, and when they start to realize, hey, I might not really need it, it's just going to count as electives, this can cause some angst. So at that point, you can go and grab one of us. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yes, oh yeah, lots of questions. I'll have you go first, Kyle, and then I'll.
Well, just regarding Grant's question, with that, it's not really wasted because no matter what they do, it covers a GE. So the only thing is that with the STEM versus non-STEM, it basically fast tracks you to get that GE and the prereq for your major, or the pre-major courses that you need. So either way, it's not wasted. They still need to take that course. They just now have to take another course to go towards that major that they want to. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I saw a couple of hands. Okay.
So, again, those are the golden 4.
Yes.
And
So the golden 4 are the everything on this slide, the oral communication, the written communication, the critical thinking, and then the fourth course is the mathematics quantitative reasoning.
Okay. And then, so for physical science, life science, and lab, you could take it for credit, no credit, or?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, you're limited on how many units you can take from credit, no credit, towards the minimum for the degree. Those are in the unit limit totals.
but those are options.
Yeah, they are, unless they're being used for major prep.
Okay.
So it really depends on the student's major. If they're using a course for major prep, and we'll discuss this next week when we talk about major minor requirements, a student cannot take a class for their major, credit, no credit. So if they're a biology major, they don't want to take biology, whatever, credit, no credit. Because while it would clear GE, it won't clear their major prep. Yes.
This is about credit, no credit. I've heard I don't really know if it's true, but I've heard some people say that if you take a class credit, no credit, and you get credit, isn't your GPA for that technically a
Credit, no
C
credit
then?
does not affect your GPA.
But for grad school and that kind of thing, don't they count it as
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
For our calculations, it's not counted.
Okay.
In some grad schools won't count credit, no credit. Some medical schools, for example, won't even accept credit, no credit.
Okay.
So if students are looking at grad schools, that's something they want to, it would probably be safer to take it as a letter grade. And again, you can only do credit, no credit, not for major courses or major prep courses, and not for the Golden Board. Yes?
Heather, tell me if you want to answer this later, but what about an undeclared student and then decide that they want to do STEM or non-STEM? How do you know that?
What week is it? Sorry, that was a little inside joke. As of right now, my understanding is that that student will work with Paul Justice, the major advisor for undeclared, and Paul Justice will work with the registrar to see if they might be able to offer an exception to that student in regards to those pathways. I would imagine we'll have a little bit more information when we get closer, but as of right now, that's the information I have. Yes?
Is nursing considered non-STEM?
You just stumped all of us, we were just like, nursing is not STEM.
Technically.
Technically.
Yeah.
Well, what's the math required for nursing? Stats.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not STEM.
Okay.
If it's a STEM major, they're gonna have a calculus series. That doesn't seem quite right, does it?
No.
No.
Huh.
Because I've been told, when I was a nursing major, oh, you're not a STEM major, and I was like, but you're yes, but no, I don't know.
Yeah, because technically you're not a science major, although a lot of your degree is based on science.
Aren't you getting a Bachelor of Science degree?
Yes, but that doesn't drive STEM, non-STEM.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of our bachelor's in science. Yeah, no, Oh,
This isn't STEM.
No, but you have to take stats.
well, that doesn't necessarily mean that just because you have to take stats, but I was trying to see if there's calculus in nursing, and there's
No,
not.
not technically.
We don't want calculus.
What major are you questioning if it's STEM?
Kinesiology.
Kinesiology is not STEM.
It's the same thing.
I feel light.
I'm done. Right?
This is a competition, guys, like, you don't put it on your resume.
No, there's so much more.
But hey, this is actually a good thing to point out. STEM, non-STEM are just, the reason we put focus on it is because of the pathways. It doesn't mean a major is better than another because they're a STEM major versus a non-STEM. I just want to throw that out there for both everyone in this room and for our new students coming in. Yes?
You also said something about for students that want to change from non-STEM to STEM, and Grant brought up wasted semester, but you said there's an exception to nursing. What is that exception?
No, what I was talking about is if a student decides they want to change their major and they come to orientation, if you guys can accommodate that student, you allow them to follow their new major throughout the day, is that correct, Denise? The exception to that is nursing, because nursing is a direct admit program only.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, I guess this one relates to me, I don't know.
That's okay.
Okay, so about so there's a public health class and the prerequisites are, in this, psychology and sociology, I took those classes. But then this public health class, it said I can't take it in the semester that I hit. I have to take it in the semester where I hit 60 units, but I won't by the end of this semester. So by taking this course, it'll clear a major requirement, but not the GE. So I'll just have, it won't double dip, basically.
Golden Four, were you saying that it has to be taken in the first year or second year? Or is it
No,
first year?
it's the first year.
So we should be encouraging them to sign up.
It's not even encouraging, they'll be enforced. The system
I
will.
didn't
Yeah,
sign up for like comm until like my second semester.
Right, but your first year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's within your first year. So that'll make a lot more sense when we get to session 6, and we talk about personal information sheets and maps.
Okay.
Because the enforced registration sheet, classes are driven by the map, and then we also pull in your degree evaluation, because maybe the student has something already completed, and then they'll go on to the next. But they can't like skip things, so they have to follow their personal information sheets.
Right.
And those are programmed specifically to that student, and it tells them exactly what out of their Golden Four, what term they're gonna be taking what.
Okay.
Yes?
For COM 103, just using it as an example, because like every first-time freshman has to take it, do they, like, and this might go along with when we talk about maps, do they divide up students so that half of them take it first semester and half take it second semester?
It's not half and half, but it is divided in a certain
Divided?
way, yeah. It's calculated based on the amount of freshmen that are coming in.
Okay, so we'll have students that will be registering for COM 103, but also ones that will be.
And let's be careful not to say COM 103 specifically, but their oral communication may be
Yeah.
required their first semester or may be required their
Okay.
second semester. Yep, and that'll make more sense when we cover personal information sheets and maps. Yes?
I just remember like during COM 103, like Professor Rapp said that typically it's split between STEM and non-STEM, like fall versus spring. Is that true or is that just?
Oh,
I love Rapp.
I don't know about that. STEM versus non-STEM in communication, I don't think communication bases it on major, I think they base it on the number of students coming in. It could be that based on times, what I'm gonna guess what it is it happens by design, because based on the timing of the classes that STEM majors have to take, those heavy science classes, those tend to be very set, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and there's only certain comm classes that will fit into those schedules, so then you end up having a comm class with a bunch of STEM majors because they're sort of forced into that time slot because of their other classes that they needed. It's what I'm gonna guess is happening. Any questions on that before we move on? Okay? All right, so you may notice, let's see where it's. So this is in regards to the science, the physical life and lab science. So if you look under 4, which is the mathematics, if you look under, you'll see in bold it says special provision for majors in the sciences and related fields. Does everyone see that? It's on the left side of page 96. Okay. So what that says is some majors require or recommend coursework in astronomy, biology, chemistry, geological sciences, or physics in preparation for the major. If you have declared one of these majors, you may substitute those courses for courses listed under either life sciences or physical sciences as appropriate in section 2A above. So if you turn to biology as an example, so let's look at page 156. On the left-hand side, we'll just look at the biology major. And if you go down to preparation for the major, you can see that the very first class listed is Biology 203. So if the student has the appropriate prereqs for that and goes straight into that class, we're not going to penalize the student and make them go backwards and take a less advanced biology. We will count that biology class in their GE. Does that make sense? For the most part, when we get to session 7 and we start going through the degree evaluation, you're going to see for the most part we tried very hard to mimic what's in the catalog. That is an exception. So if you go to the sciences in the catalog and you look, so we're on page 95, for example, life sciences, you only see 3 classes listed, and those are the more, those are sort of the, I don't want to say entry level, but they're the more general. They're biology 100, biology 101. So 203, 203 lab, those classes aren't listed there. So even though we try to mimic the catalog with the degree evaluation, that is actually where we make an exception. So when a student is looking at their degree evaluation under the life sciences, for example, we're going to list everything that would count in life sciences as GE, which is going to include those more advanced biology classes. That way it's a little easier for a student to understand that if they're taking biology 203 for their major prep, it will also count in their GE. Does that make sense? Yes?
What if, they have credit for biology, 100 from an AP exam? Would they be exempt from that altogether, or would they still have to take one of those higher level?
Well, they would clear the GE with that, but then they would still need to go on to the more advanced for their major prep.
Okay.
So the biology 100 would clear their GE, but then they would still need the major prep courses. So if they were more advanced, they'd have to go further. Any other questions? Okay. Okay. So now we're going to go on to the next section, and we're still in Foundations of Learning. So now we're moving on to Social and Behavioral Sciences. So this is CSU Area D, Social Sciences. So the rule here is complete 3 courses taken from a minimum of 2 different departments, so 9 units. Courses that also fulfill the American Institutions requirement are identified below as AI. Refer to Section 4, American Institutions requirement. No more than 6 units of American Institutions courses may apply to general education. So when we say 3 courses from 2 different departments, so what do we consider a department? So Soc, Ant, Psych, those are all different departments. So sociology, anthropology, psychology, econ, these are all separate academic departments. So 3 courses from 2 different departments. Any questions on that? Yes.
So are they able to double dip within their major for this? So example would be, if someone were to take AFRAS and they take 170 A and B, so that would be the 6 units of American Institutions, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then the 3 units can that come from one of their major classes?
From their major prep?
Mhm.
Sure, if it's applicable, as long as it's not an AFRAS class. That would have to be a different department.
For sure.
And we'll come up with a brief example of that at the end of this with a business student. And I'll loop back around to this part, just because that is it's a little tricky to understand. But yeah, and again, session 6 will start to show us, and then section 7 was where we really get to pull it all together with the degree evaluation. The map is going to tell you, it's important to remember the map is general, so we don't want to rely on it too much, but it is a really useful tool, especially because it tells you when classes double count between GE and major prep. So that's really helpful for students to utilize so they're not taking courses that they don't need. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. So now, this area is also part of Foundations of Learning. So this is changing. This is going to be changing from past catalog years to the 1920 catalog year. So in the 1920 catalog year, it's called Arts and Humanities. A student must complete 1 course from each area for a minimum of 9 units. And I'm going to explain that further in just a second. So the CSU sub-area C1 is arts, which includes art, cinema, dance, music, and theater. And the CSU sub-area C2 is everything else in humanities, that is world history, languages other than English, literature, philosophy, and religious studies. So a student needs 3 courses. 1 needs to come from C1, 1 needs to come from C2, and the 3rd course can either be a C1 or a C2. Yes?
This is the biggest change.
Yes. Well, yes, it is. That and about what I'm about to talk about, yeah. Any questions on that? So I'm gonna recap that. So in this area, it's called Arts and Humanities. There's 3 courses required, a total of minimum 9 units. And it's one course from C1, one course from C2, and the third course will come from C1 or C2. Any questions on that? Okay. Okay. And now the other change. This is area 3, which is called lifelong learning and self-development. So it's 3 units and it's considered CSU area E. I did list the courses just because those aren't listed in the catalog. This is a brand new addition. Again, I won't ask you specific questions about the classes, but I just listed them just because I could fit them on the slide. And they're not anywhere in the current catalog, just so you have them. So this is area 3, lifelong learning and self-development. 1 course is required, and this is considered area E. So we just went through foundations of learning, which is area 2, and lifelong learning and self-development, which is area 3. And when you combine those two, it's a minimum of 31 units. Okay, so we've gone through the first area, communication and critical thinking, which is 9 units. Now we've gone through these 2 areas, which is a minimum of 31 units. Yes?
What's the point of having child and family development 170 and teacher education 170 if they're the same course?
Well, they're just, so see how it says same course as? So they're just offered by 2 different departments, but they're the same course. So each department owns it, but they're cross-listed. Any other questions? Okay. Usually it's because it's part of each of their curriculum, so it's under their own department name, but they're cross-listed with each other. Okay. We good so far? All right. All right. So let's go on, and now we're on area 4, which is explorations of human experience. So this is a minimum of 9 units. These classes are 300 and 400 level. 300 and 400 level. Does anyone remember what rule number 3 that we went over says about GE? You cannot count 500 level courses in GE. So when I specifically ask about upper division classes, if I ask about the numbers, I'm looking for 300 through 499. These are 300 and 400 level classes. So, this is going to sound like we're repeating it a lot, but we do it on purpose. Courses in this area must not be taken sooner than the semester in which you achieve upper division standing, which is 60 units passed. So that's going to be important, especially with our freshmen and our freshmen rather, excuse me. Even if they have, even if they come in with 30 credits from AP, they're still freshmen, right? They don't have 60 units. And sometimes, especially because registration labs are at the end of the day, it's a long day, maybe some of the information has been forgotten, they get overwhelmed, anxious, whatever it is. So when we're going around checking student schedules, it's really important to double check and make sure that they're not in 300 and 400 level classes, because they shouldn't be. And if a student does take a 300 or 400 level GE course, those courses will not count. 9 units of upper division general education courses shall be taken within the California State University CSU system. Every student has to complete 1 course in each area, which is area A, natural sciences, area B, social and behavioral sciences, and area C, which is humanities. So every student needs to complete a total of 3 courses, 1 course from A, B, and C. One of these 3 courses must be a course in cultural diversity, and if you're looking in the catalog, these courses are designated by an asterisk. If you're looking at the degree evaluation, these courses are designated by a plus sign. When, let's say, a transfer student, they have over 60 units, therefore they are allowed to take upper division GE right away. let's say a transfer student is searching by these areas of GE, if you're looking in the class schedule, it is not going to tell you if the class is culturally diverse or not. So you'd have to double check on either the evaluation or in the catalog to see if it's designated as culturally diverse. Just one of the three has to be culturally diverse. Any questions on that? No? Okay. Anything to add from the PIs or EVs? Okay. Okay. So, so again, no sooner than 60 units passed. And there's a paragraph before in the current catalog, before the explorations start. And it says that, so this is just to revisit the whole American institutions thing. Okay, no, so I'm sorry, I just read through that paragraph. Okay, so let's talk about American institutions. So 100 and 200 level American institutions courses can also be found in the Foundation Social and Behavioral Sciences. Okay? And 300 and 400 level American institutions courses can also be found in the Explorations, upper division, Social and Behavioral Sciences. And again, no more than 2 American institutions courses can be used in GE. So basically, bottom line, when it comes to this and knowing when a student should and should not double count these classes, we recommend that they follow the map regarding their American institutions. We've gone through each map in each major and figured out the best way for these students to utilize this double counting. We didn't used to double count American institutions in GE. So we recommend they follow their map in regards to that. Any questions? Okay. All right, so let's. Do you have anything you want to clarify? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. All right, so let's look at an example, specifically talking about the major, double counting, and American institution. So if we talk about the business major, and the prep is listed on page 165, so we can look at an example of this student who's a business major. This is going to be a little hard to understand because we haven't talked about major requirements, we haven't started looking at a degree evaluation. So for this, think of your own major. So every student has major prep to do, right? And sometimes that major prep can double count with GE. So under preparation for the major on page 165, you can see that 2 of the prep courses that the student needs to take are Econ 101 and Econ 102. Now, if you go back to the Foundation Social and Behavioral list in the GE area, students need 3 courses from that list from 2 different departments. So Econ 101 and Econ 102 can count as 2 of the 3 required courses. So now this student needs 1 more course for Social and Behavioral Science. And if they haven't used their allotment of American institutions in GE, which is how many courses? 2, no more than 2 courses, or 6 units, then that could be their 3rd course. A course they take for American institutions could be their 3rd course. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Okay, any questions at all? All right, we're going to take a break. Why don't we have everyone back at 4:20?
The rest of this. Yeah.
So
Pretty good, I know, it is really good.